Ladies and gentlemen, now we proceed with the second distinguished key lecture by Bi Puranen. The topic is the relation between Muslim localized conflicts, grievances, and transnational violence. Please.
Thanks a lot. Am I supposed to do anything to get the presentation on? Okay, while waiting for the presentation to come on, this is a presentation based on research that I have done together with Irina Vartanova, which you know very well. She is a part of the lab, and I'm extremely happy to be here. And Irina is sending her best greetings to you all. This research is about the MENA region, more specifically. Am I supposed to do something to get it on?
Did you try to switch the screens?
How do I do that? In which way switch?
I think that he switched it already.
I have done nothing. I just let him do it.
We need some technical support so that the speakers would not distract.
I have it here, but I don't have it there. Okay. Maybe I can start anyhow, and then I have it beautifully here, but I don't have it. I think I should do nothing. I think he's the one to put it out. We'll let it be, Annika. Well, let me start talking. I think it's better that he's doing it, because otherwise, you see it here.
Sophisticated technique.
It's not output from here. Take the clone.
It was working before, so I think it should not be a problem.
Another time, like you
Want me
made
to?
first.
Like
Yeah,
that?
switch on. Yes.
Yeah. I have to.
How you did it before that?
I have done nothing. I have it as it was when I started.
How you switch?
Oh, it's working. It was working when we tested.
It was good. Try it another time. Maybe need to reload.
And one more time to switch. How you switch the screens? Because it's yeah.
But it doesn't give it
Try
out.
another time.
But I have done it twice now. It's not a bad one because it worked.
Yeah, it worked, but it's
maybe we could
seems-
put it on a thumb drive and put it onto that computer, because that one does work.
Can we take
Put your
this out?
presentation on a thumb.
Yes.
Yeah, I have it here too as a reserve, but that's not a good.
How you made clone?
Oh, I just did it as I had it before. So now we take
Need to clone.
this one, but it doesn't have.
Cloning picture.
No, but it did work.
You must switch to clone.
Can't you just take this one there and see? It's a green one.
It's sleep. Another screen is sleep.
Yeah, the screen is sleeping. It seems to be. What is this?
That's just colors when I do the when I make them.
And
But it's not sleeping because it's active.
can you close everything and switch it?
That looks good. No.
It's embarrassing.
This is when journalists sometimes started.
I have it, but it doesn't.
Yeah, but we tried.
And
I think it's.
it worked beautifully. Yeah.
Can you change on two screens?
If what?
You have two screens, you see?
No, you have
No,
not two
it's
screens.
not
It's
two
slides.
screens.
You need to switch on your computer.
I think she's putting it out here on I have it with the camera. I do it like that. So, and then you get it up here, right? Can you get it?
So you can launch it wherever.
Нет, все, он сейчас там.
Yeah. And then I just use. Sorry. But it's such a beautiful picture, so I'm sorry for this. We found another way of doing it. Thank you so much for inviting me to come here. And as you can see, the World Value Survey is both the Earth and the Moon above us here in Moscow on this very well-made conference. The theme of the report that we're working on now, me and Irina, is the relationship between Muslim localized conflicts, which we have quite a lot of focus on. But it's not only the localized conflicts, it's also people's feeling and perceptions, grievances. And what I will try to show is that this is indeed a transnational violation. It's not regional per se. By tradition, I do as Christian Herfer, Professor Herfer did, by looking at the more basic facts first and then continue with the more in-depth analysis of what is happening. What one can see in the countries you have, the scale going from the more yellow, you can see the differences between female and male for the MENA region countries as compared with the other regions. I didn't take 8 regions, Christian, but just take Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, West, and Sweden. And you can see the huge differences when it comes to a question like gender equality. And I think that is the question that most of us worries about when it comes to the meeting between different cultures in the world and the pace of change. Let me explain it. Here we have on the x-axis the acceptance of women plotted globally, and then you can see the acceptance of immigrants. Because what we see today is a lot of people fleeing because they're tired of the violence and the threat, especially from Syria, of course, but also from Iraq and other countries. And if we look a bit more thoroughly at this the scatter plot, you can see different patterns just by looking at one slide, and then we will go more in depth into this. If we take the yellow dots, we have the Western world, where we can see we have a high acceptance of women, and we can see big differences within the Western world when it comes to acceptance of immigrants. My country, Sweden, is by far the most friendly, immigrant-friendly country in the world. And we can see, for example, that we talk about Germany that has also had a very open-minded attitude. They are far below the Scandinavian countries. But there are also other important patterns in this. If we look at the MENA region, you see the orange culture there. We can see that there are more the acceptance of immigrants is much higher than the acceptance of women. And that's what I mean when I say that that is a crucial question to address when we discuss this. But we have other patterns as well. We can look at Eastern Europe. You have high acceptance of women, but a much lower one when it comes to immigrants. We can see Latin America, and we can see Africa more spread out, but we can see that most of Latin America is below the regression line. So this is the background on how to get the different worlds together. I have some starting points, important starting points when it comes to an analysis of the Middle East or the MENA region. The first one, militant Islamism and the rise of jihadists are symptoms of historical processes. We tend to discuss it as something of today, but it indeed originates from historical processes and intricate variables that are not centrally connected to Islam per se. And that is important in the analysis to keep that in mind. The symptoms should not be attributed to religion itself. I will argue that the use of violence in order to achieve political change is rejected by the absolute majority of the people living in the Middle East and in the North African countries. I hope to show that for you, and that is what the whole paper is aiming at. The prevalent and extreme use of violence in the region is being perpetrated by a clear minority in a bid to influence the majority, not only within the region, but also globally. These are the starting points for our research. We are basing it on the cognitive dissonance theory, and I've tried to illustrate it with these iceberg and the compass. People always strive for harmony between their attitudes and values in order to achieve this inner consistency. This is old research based on Leon Festinger that has been developed. Those of you coming from here who know Irina, you know that she is originally trained in psychology, and we have leaned to psychological research and tried to combine that with the more traditional work of survey techniques in the World Value Survey. Aronson and Mills made a revision of the theory where they proposed, and I quote, that dissonance is really nothing more than guilt, the feeling of guilt and the feeling of dissonance which you get then. And this is indeed close to the most recent research on social norm changes and values. We work now at the Institute for Future Studies in Stockholm, where there's a lot of research going on when it comes to social norm changes. There are difficulties of observing these dissonances since we can't directly measure them, and that's why it's interesting to look and learn a bit more from the psychological part of the research arena. Often the individuals themselves are not even aware of the dissonance between their values, but they feel discomfort without knowing why. When we talk about social norms, we generally define them as a set of behaviors for which it's reasonable to believe that a deviation will cause social sanctions. That's what we feel immediately when we do something that's outside the social norm. But why then, how come that social norms do change, which they do? What are the triggers that change social norms when we risk to have a social sanction on it? That's what we try to see in this. Which mechanisms are strong enough to change social norms? And what are the values behind them? That is the question when we analyze this in the MENA region. One possibility on elaborating on such a question is to analyze what do the people themselves believe, what kind of belief systems, what are the perceptions they have in this. So what we did, we took really three broad groups. One, the Arabic countries, the 13 we have in the World Value Survey, which means over 16,000 respondents that have been interviewed in the area. Then we have other non-Arabic Muslim countries, 29, 9,000, a bit more. And then in the first step, we took all the other countries, 39 countries, more than 55,000 interviewed people in the next part. Earlier, I have had the pleasure of being able to work together with Chris Welzer and Ron Engelhardt on an article that has just been published in the journal Peace Research, where we was analyzing willingness to fight for one's country, that single variable and the causes of the decline that we have. I also, in the Festschrift that we made for Ron, I did an article on the same subject and some other places. So this is the background, the overall decline of violence, even though we every day in the media and especially in the social media hear about the violence, terrible violence. We have Paris right now, but actually we have a long trend. The psychologist Steven Pinker wrote a big book that is heavily quoted about these issues, the decline of violence. What we have done then, we have taken a big set that we have into the question in the questionnaire of the World Value Survey and divided it. We run factor scores quite simply, and it beautifully fell out in what we could call the local insecurity. I mean, we talk about human security, the subjective security, and then we have the more well, state, it might not be the very best way of labeling it, but it's about worries. Worries about a war involving my country, worries about a terrorist attack, and worries about civil war. The level of worry is extreme in the area. Imagine people, when you are on a level like that, imagine living in Tunisia, where you have some, over 90% of the population feel constantly a worry for a terrorist attack. Imagine year out and year in, this is not just something that is flashing up in the media when something is happening. This is what ordinary people are living with on a daily basis. What does it make to you to live with these worries all the time? Well, if you look at local versus state security, a very interesting pattern comes up. We could see that the feeling of that we do not feel so threatened by violence, civil war or terrorism. You can see the Nordic countries up there in the top, but you can also see that it's a much more scattered plot than the earlier one that we showed. But we can also see that in these countries with very high levels of worries, we can also see that we have countries where they feel safe, relatively safe when it comes to local security. Then in the battery, we have two more questions. I didn't bring them into the first factor analysis because I think it will contaminate the analysis. So what we did actually, we were taking them out and then we analyzed that. I know you're happy for that, Juan. And these are these two. Losing my job or finding a job. I mean, more economic worries. Or not being able to give my children a good education. What do they do when you try to see what the economic worries? And yesterday we talked a lot about economic worries and inequality. And I must say, when I sat there and listened, I really thought about what we've seen in the MENA region. As you see, the more blue, the darker it is. You can see that Tunisia and Yemen, just by a quick look, or Egypt, you really have a lot of worries when it comes to these questions. If you compare losing your job and children's education with war, terrorism, and civil war, I would say the wiretapping doesn't give so much. I mean, it's interesting that we are putting the question there, but now we have decided in the World Value Survey we will not have it in the future. It didn't give so much. But in a way, that's an important result too. But here you can see the differences. Now look, for example, at Egypt, where you have a worry that for civil war on 88%, you have 78, 81, extremely high. And you can see that for Yemen, Tunisia, and Libya too. Now, if you compare that with local security, you see it's much, much lighter. You do not have the same level of worry when it comes to local security as you do have on the big questions. That's why we talk about transnational violence, really. You can see it. It's not locally induced. It's more transnational reasons for the worries for violence and for war. And it's very interesting when we have actually two questions on whether you yourself or your family has been victims for a crime during the last year. This is really, when you cross them with each other and you think about the two before, you can see, for example, well, it's quite high on Algeria, Lebanon, as you had on the previous graph. But look at Egypt. Look at Egypt down here somewhere. It's almost none, but the level of worry was extreme. So it really shows the importance of both analyzing the perceptions and if you really have, I mean, the actions. That's why it's very good that we have these questions on, have you experienced yourself? Not just what is my feeling, but also what is my experience when it comes to violence. And of course, this goes very closely together with the things that, where you have trust. And what we see here is we have a whole battery on trust. We can see that in-group trust, the close neighborhood, the family, I mean, that trust is essentially different from the out-group trust with the people outside. And if we then plot them, we can see that, again, you see Sweden, we are really a very extreme country. And I must say, these people now, a lot of them coming to Sweden, every day, thousands and thousands from the region, are they really prepared to come to this weird country? I mean, I must say there will be very interesting reactions, not only when it comes to our extreme high level of trust, because we trust them when they come. We say welcome. People are standing there with big signs and saying welcome when they're coming, and they do mean it. They do mean it. We are extremely high when it comes to out-group trust. We welcome people, and they are welcome as long as they follow the values, and important values, as you saw on the very first slide. It's gender, to treat women as good as men, no difference. And what will happen when people see refugees coming not being good to their women or their children? That is the big challenge now, and we can see it here. We know it will come, and I'm talking with the authorities in Sweden every day. They need to work with values. They need to make sure that people know what the law in Sweden is. They are not allowed to hit a child. It's unlawful, as many other things, and they need to know this. Otherwise, there will be reactions, because it's unlawful. So you can see here the huge differences when it comes to in-groups and out-group, and the importance of these things. Well then, if we take the violence question, we have one variable, and that's whether violence is always or never justifiable, and it's a 10-grade scale. And what is interesting is, if you look at that never justifiable, or 1 to 3, we can see that most people all around the world, violence is not justifiable. We don't like violence. It's something that's very rarely is justifiable. But I was interested in the other part of the scale, always justifiable. Look at 8 to 10. Look at the MENA region. 2.3% of the population actually are there and accepts violence. That's the same figure as in all other Muslim countries. It is not more people in the MENA region than other Muslims who accept violence as justifiable. Compare that with the rest of the world. You can see all non-Muslim countries is substantially higher. Is substantially higher, 3.6. You can see my country, Sweden, we are at 3.6, US 2.7. There are substantially more people saying no to violence in Muslim countries and in the MENA countries than in, for example, Sweden. But there is a stereotyping going on, a huge stereotyping about violence and the origin of violence, which is very important to think. Of course, these are small numbers when we come in, and that's the problem. When we work with the regressions, we need to have quite big numbers, and we have a problem here. But on the other hand, if you look at all others, we are up to quite big numbers. So what we are doing now, and I would be very happy if we could get some contact with those of you who are interested in analysis using small numbers and methods to use for that. We have another problem. We are interested in the importance of religiosity in this. And when we talk about religiosity, we have another problem in the MENA region and in Muslim countries, and that is the low variance. So we have two huge problems here, small numbers and low variance. And it might be, and we really need to improve the analysis. So this is really work in progress, what we are doing. But we know what we are looking for, and we have the hypothesis, and we have the theories, and we are into it. And we have run regressions on it. And we have looked at, as you see, all the background variables on age, sex, region, and also subjective income, which we talked about yesterday. And you can see the importance of God, and that we had its focus. And we more specifically went into the question on religious authorities interpret the laws, because we have seen on the questions on telling what people think is essential for democracy, what Christian was talking about, we see that people in the region, in the MENA region, say that religious leaders, authorities interpret the law. That's a part of democracy, which, as you know, the Western concept it's not included at all in this. So what we have done now so far, this is the preliminary result, and I really promised Irina to stress that it's preliminary results. You who know her know that she is very And she's worried about the regressions because we have so small numbers. But we need to continue with this. So what we see is the importance of God, high importance of God, less people in the region saying that God is important are less violent, especially in the MENA region, but also in other Muslim countries. We can also see, as you saw in the regression, that you get less violence with age. We can see that women is less violent. This is known from many other areas when you do research on violence. On the question, I'm a religious person, not religious persons are more violent in the MENA region, but we have the contrary result for the rest of the Muslim countries. So ongoing research there. Less violent with age, women less violent, the same. Subjective income is inserted to control for social status. It is significant that the respondents with higher subjective income are more violent. So these are some of the conclusions so far. Our reflection is that since it is not normal not to be religious in the MENA region, makes it difficult with the analysis of the importance of, because we have the very lack of variance. And we can also, as a reflection, say that it is not normal to justify violence. And it is interesting to see whether one might use more psychological and analytical tools on abnormal personalities. We have them all over the world. It's a part of life that some people tend to be a bit psychopath, tending to use violence. They are, of course, in this group of the 8 to 10 on accepting violence, but there are other possibilities too. This is how it looks when we talk about the violence versus I'm a religious person. And we can see that it's not the MENA region countries that tend to these are the means, violence is justifiable. There are actually other countries like South Africa, Philippines, Singapore, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, for example. So this is ongoing research, and I would like to, and I must, since we were having a bit struggle in the beginning with the technique, can I have 1 minute more, or I don't know where we are in the schedule. Is it okay? Okay.
About 5 minutes more.
Oh, I will not need 5 minutes, but I would like to have a couple of minutes because of the delay. Yeah, I missed the time because of that. Thank you. I would like to end by a couple of reflections on this. We had these things happening now in Paris, and it's obvious that we talk about transnational violence. The Islamic State, or ISIS or Daesh, is not just a joker with its vision which they have announced every now and then, that they have a vision that within 5 years, the whole of the Middle East and also the whole of the Mediterranean area will be controlled by the caliphate. That's their goal that they have. But of course, it's also a factor. So even if we might reject that and say this is not realistic at all, we must accept that it's a factor of great uncertainty. Really very difficult. We can see it in international relations when they try to do their analytical work on it. But I think that this analytical work within the frame of World Values Survey is very important, because without the support for violence as a mean, without the support for violence as a mean from the locals, from the people, they will not have a chance to succeed. So our results showing that there is a huge worry and there is a non-acceptance of violence as a mean for a change. From that, I think we can we could predict and say that this will be a parenthesis in the history of mankind, because if you would like to base a society on strict Sharia laws and jihadism, then you need to have a locally grounded support. And what we can see is that there is none of this. So my conclusion is that we have a dissonance here, a cognitive dissonance, which is very clear between people's feeling of not wanting violence as a solution. One could say like this: even if we are pessimists in our brain, easy to be in this issue, even if we are pessimists in our brain, we need to be optimists in our heart. And as researchers, we have as much chronic cognitive dissonance as the people in the Middle East. We do have understanding of the problem, theoretically, but we also have hearts, all of us. And we are worried about the world, and we're worried about ourselves. We are worried about what happened in Paris, what happened in Moscow, etc. I see this as extremely important that we take the responsibility as a researcher and that we work with the full of us to fight the cognitive dissonance. So, yeah, I stop there.
Thank you very much for these provocative and challenging conclusions, and there is no doubt there should be lots of questions. Please.
Thank you, Bi, for this nice presentation. And thanks for actually showing that actually people in general in the MENA region and in other Muslim countries that not different than other places. And it's only the minority that actually are slightly maybe more violent. And I think I mean, we are all sorry, really. I mean, yesterday when I heard the news also about the bombing, it was terrible. I mean, for everybody. Nobody wants to see anybody killing anywhere in the world. I mean, let alone innocent people. But I really think there is a fundamental also problem in the region, in a sense that actually I think for some time, I think, how do we call it? The discourse that actually was communicated throughout for past 20 years, or maybe even more, through the education system, through the media, I don't think it was balanced. I really don't think it was a true Islamic discourse in the real sense. It was more toward the extreme. So part of it, when now looking at it, I really think it is definitely the, how I would call it, establishments were partly responsible for it. Because they basically encourage this, what we call it, if I may call it, hatred culture, where actually people just advocated the exclusion culture rather than inclusion. What I'm trying to say is that for a long time, people were brought up and bombarded with the message that actually we are different, which is fine, but then other people are not good, which is not fine. And I think it has to be changed. I think if we really want to do something, if we want to see the end of ISIS, I don't think really it is in the military. ISIS could go, but the ideology will remain if actually things on the ground don't change. I think the best way to combat ISIS is really to change this discourse within the region. I think we should, I mean, not we, but really the people in the region and basically the establishments should really encourage the discourse of inclusion, that actually the true spirit of Islam, where actually that humanity, I mean, we have a verse in Quran that said, if you kill one person, as though you have killed all humanities. So it's no way actually that you can find any justification of just going on. But thank you very much, Bi, for really highlighting this. I know there is more actually to be said, but I just really wanted to share my feelings as well. Thank you.
Thank you for this insightful comment. Other questions? Yes, please.
Well, thank you for the insightful lecture. I'm a student majoring in the United States Middle East foreign policy, and my question is as follows. Well, as Middle East saw its regimes destroyed and stability undermined, a lot of migrants headed to Europe in search of new life, well-being and stability. However, now, following Paris terrorist attacks and other international developments, it seems that Europeans are not going to accept those migrants naturally. And my question is, how could this accommodation crisis be resolved? In what measures? Thank you.
Big question.
Yeah,
as you saw, there are huge varieties within the West, the countries that people, no, I'm talking about refugees, not work migrants, but refugees. First of all, if I talk about the European Union, it's a shame that they have not been able to have a common platform for how to work with this issue. Each country is kind of having their own policy, and it differs a lot. So that's one of the first and most important to agree on and to have solidarity. Why do you have a union if you have no solidarity when people die out on the sea, on the map? It's just terrible with all these tragedies. It's far too slow, the process, and it's far too much, and it shows how little common community there is in the union. I mean, it's scaring. So that's one of the. When it comes to what it is, I would say that your question also touches upon what Darvish said about inclusion. It shows the very lack of a will for inclusion. I firmly believe that if we are going to success, I mean, we are talking about very big figures now for a foreseen period, long period, we really need to work with values. Because if we are not working with values, then we really will have a clash. We will not accept the way women are treated or children are treated. But there's a problem with it, but it's also a possibility in it. Think about all these people who come. If I talk about Sweden, we have seen, when we made our analysis in Sweden, we have seen that the attitudes to immigrants, and I think this goes for fairly many other countries, but I only have figures for Sweden. We can see that there's a difference between gender. Women are much more positive to immigrants than men. We can see that high educated much more positive than low educated. We can see that people in urban areas are much more positive than on rural areas. And we can see that it's not the youngest and the eldest, it's the mid generation that are most positive. The youngest are themselves not on the labor market, and they feel a threat that they will have to compete, so it can be understandable, and that need to be faced. I think taking this all in means that we need to work much more with our own populations with the acceptance question. But we also need to work with programs with all the immigrants or the refugees coming in. We need, for example, they need to learn what is the law in each country. What does the law say in France or in Germany or wherever you come to? And they need to follow the laws. There is no way of getting away from that part, and that alone is a huge thing. But the positive part with that is when you get, especially the young people, as Ron has shown in his whole life's research, there is a generation effect, that is a cohort effect that's very strong. The young people will take on and will be socialized quite fast. There are studies from Denmark showing where they have combined ESS and World Value Survey with local studies, and they can see that when they come to a high trust country and they are themselves low trust, within the period of 30 years, they are up to the same level of trust as the population in Denmark. If this holds true, I mean, then we know that we have a limited period of time where we have hard works to do with the immigration, to get the inclusion and get that working. But if we do not do that work, and the good thing is that these people will then tell people at home, so maybe this can be a power to change the world faster into a pattern where human resource questions are put at focus, that women have the same equal rights as men, that children have their rights, etc. So it can be a powerful change that can be positive if we do it the right way. So it's really a challenge.
Thank you. I guess we may have time for one or two more questions. Please. Yes, please.
Hello, thank you very much for your very insightful overview of your work. My question is about whether people in the region understand violence in the same way across the world. Because we know that in some regions people understand the concepts like democracy different. Yeah, and if you ask people in Russia about democracy and what does it really mean, it can be different from what people say about the same concept in, I don't know, in the US. Thank you very much.
Thank you for putting that very important question. Yes, we have seen, for example, Pew has done a study on violence where we clearly can see that there are differences, as we have in democracy, what we consider as democracy. We also have huge differences when it comes to violence. For example, there is in the region, in the MENA region, a division between violence that is when you're punished in the official system, you have an acceptance for that kind of violence, and it's quite harsh violence they have in their law systems in many countries, and there is an acceptance for that. We will never ever have that kind of acceptance if we talk about the Western world. We do not accept that you cut hands, which you do by the law in some countries. So sure, there are differences. It is quite interesting also to see, it would be interesting to have, but we do not have data for that, not just violence towards other people, but for example, how do you treat animals? It says something about a society, if you're prepared to kick a dog or not, etc. So violence is a very tricky thing to analyze, and it's totally cultural dependent. There is no universal definition of violence. It varies a lot. But we need to understand in depth the varieties of violence, as we do with democracy. Once we do that, when we have our battery on democracy, we can work very well with it. And in the same way, we need to deepens the understanding of the nature of violence and how it differs in different parts of the world.
Thank you, and we want to take the last question.
Yeah, I have a very short, brief question about, you showed the table about worries, and I noticed that for example, for Kuwait and for Qatar, the percentage of people who worried too much about not being able to give education to children is high. So do you have any explanation for that? Because we know from the statistics that the percentage of people who get higher education in these countries is very high. I mean, comparing to other MENA countries. And I know that the policies are very welcoming education, and it's free. So why people still worrying about not being able to give education to their children?
Yeah, I think Darwish actually coming from Qatar could
I can explain that actually.
Yeah.
Well, I really think that yes, education even up to university or even postgraduate is really free. It's sponsored by government, all the way even up to PhD. So the availability is there. But I think worry is about perception. That actually people think that actually the type of education that is provided in the general public school is not up to the standard that actually they wish. And that's why actually nowadays, for example, in Qatar, you'll find there is a spread of what we call it international school. So there is now maybe about 40% of the Qatari families take their kids to those schools. So I can see this worrying sign in that light, not in the light that actually there is lack of education or that there are no schools or no funds. No, it is lack of the quality type of education that actually they seek, and primarily in the public level, that's K to 12.
I would dig it into detail. Maybe
your microphone.
So I would dig into your place into more details, just correcting, I mean, just checking if everything is fine with the figures. Because if this is true what you have said, that's what my thoughts. So I would be expecting that there should be no worries, like with the jobs, because there is no unemployment. They don't worry about the jobs. Why then they're worrying about the education? If it's free and available and a lot of possibilities, so...
But it is a question about the quality of the education too. I mean, I've only been a couple of times to Qatar, but now we have a specialist here who's also working at the university. But I mean, when you are on an international arena, which you are, the higher up you come in the educational system, we have had deterioration in the quality. For example, in Europe, Juan and I was just talking about it the other day. Really problems, and people feel these problems because you're out there competing globally with people from Asia who are high achievers when it comes to that. And we need to have good enough teachers, professors at the university, etc. So it really makes sense to be a bit worried in a knowledge-based society to care for educational system. I would be more worried if people were not worried when it comes to education, because it's a key issue, really.
Dear friends, we may continue this during the coffee break. And this was a very exciting session, and many thanks to the presenters and to those who attended.
Yeah, I just remind you that we are meeting in the next building, 124 and 125. So the rooms are there.
Thank you.